Hi, I'm Craig Valine, and welcome to the EMP Podcast. Today's guest is Ezra DeWolfe, a leading ADHD business strategist and founder of ADHD Tools. He's helped over 22,000 entrepreneurs with ADHD reclaim their focus, boost profits, and build systems that work with their brain, not against it. If you've ever felt like your ADHD is holding you back in business, Ezra's here to show you it might actually be your greatest edge. Ezra, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, in a moment, we're going to find out a little bit about your story, but I have a very powerful opening question for you. And that is, you say that ADHD isn't the reason entrepreneurs are failing. It's actually the hidden advantage behind some of the most successful founders. And that's a bold claim. Can you unpack that for us and explain how ADHD can be a superpower in business when harnessed correctly?
Sure. Yeah. I think the simple way to look at it is to ask ourselves, why is it that we see all these ADHD, ADD types almost overrepresented in the business world? And I think the reason it is that if we think about ADD, ADHD as sort of like a set of traits, a lot of the traits consistent with entrepreneurship and success are the traits consistent with ADHD. Things like the big picture thinking, being able to sort of like see things creatively, laterally, be able to isolate right on exactly what the problem is. And those are things that are very difficult to hire for in a business. Very difficult if the owner doesn't have those things. On the other hand, a lot of the things that people with ADHD tend to struggle with, the sort of some of the follow through, the consistency, sometimes rejection sensitivity, those are things we can often hire for. Those are things we can often mitigate. And so leaning into it the right way, it could be the superpower, and entirely unmanaged, it will equally be the kryptonite that sinks everything that somebody's doing.
Yeah, I can see that. Before we get started here, you told me a little bit about your journey and what brought you here to this type of work. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I I also have ADHD. I am sort of the model of exactly the type of journey that somebody's gone through. I was always the person who had like 80 different GoDaddy domains of all of the things I'd been working on at the time. I cared like so deeply about making a dent in the world. I would work with people, get them amazing results. And then on the other side, I wasn't always so great on the business side. I wouldn't always file all the invoices in times. I would get behind on things. I knew I was leaving so much on the table. And the way I always tried to get through that was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to earn so much money that it doesn't matter if things fall through the cracks. And I knew there was something wasn't quite there later in life. Later in life, I learned that actually the reason for those things was not that I was lazy. It was not that I was broken, because I knew I wasn't a lazy person. That didn't make sense. It was just I had a particular neurological type. And I learned there was particular things that if we do them, we can mitigate a lot of the things that hold us back. And if we don't, then we'll be stuck in those points. So very much the journey that I work on, it's a very specific problem. It's very specific to me, which is people who learn later in life that actually some of these things are going on is related to ADHD, and who are responsible people. They're not people who lean. This is very similar to my journey. When I first heard about that as a solution, I thought, no, I'm not a victim. I don't buy it. I don't buy the labels. I set my own future. And then when I started my own sort of journey and what I help other people go through is like, what does that look like for a responsible person who's like,
Mm.
okay, this is just reality. I'm right-handed, I'm left-handed, I'm diabetic, I'm not diabetic. There's certain things I got to do. And if I do those things, I'll be fine. And if I don't do those things, I might not be fine. So that's my journey, which is the same as most of the people I work with now, which is why I think we're able
Wow,
to get people those results.
fascinating. You say that, let's get on some of the business strategy, ADHD business strategy. So you say traditional time management tools fail ADHD entrepreneurs. Can you share a real world example where a conventional method totally backfired and what worked instead?
Sure. Yeah. This is often in the journey that somebody who's struggling with these things goes down. They lean into neurotypical productivity advice, which presumes that the whole reason why maybe that you're struggling with things is it's never ever occurred to you to write down a to-do list. It's never occurred to you to break out your stuff about important and not important, which kind of presumes that but it doesn't take into account what we need to do a little bit differently is to account for things like people with ADHD neurologically have a slightly different perception of time. Sometimes they have something called time blindness. They
Mm.
might have trouble estimating how long things take accurately. Time might be intellectually real. I know something's in 2 weeks, but it doesn't feel real until the day before. These are examples of time blindness. And
Wow.
so you can use any planner in the world, and if time doesn't feel real, it's not going to work. On the other hand, if we go at that root problem, if we build your time awareness, if we overcome time blindness, suddenly what we find is all of those things that you have tried in the past suddenly start working because the issue was not that, like, yes, you've tried 50 planners and maybe the 51st planner is going to fix your problem. That's not the issue. The issue is you. So often what we have to do is we have to start with the person, starting at getting at some of those root issues so that everything else can fall into place.
Kind of a side question that I find myself like I use a Franklin planner. I have a Google calendar, which, I'm a techie, but I'm not a techie.
Mhm.
So I find myself, I need the reminders. So the automatic reminders on Google Calendar, but I kind of use my Franklin planner as a to-do list.
Mhm.
And so, but that doesn't mean that I get anything done on time or early or things like that. So I don't know if I fall into the ADHD category. I've never been tested for that, although my son has.
Mhm.
But it's interesting that I have tried every planner on earth, and I find that these two things are the ones that help me. And maybe because that's me, maybe it's just me that I figured out taking responsibility for that. So anyway, just something that I observed.
Mm.
So, what does it look like to design a business system that works with your brain, not against it? And can you give us a behind the scenes look?
Yeah, often. So there's a few things we have to set up. So the first thing we have to set up is sort of taking into account that we literally might have different needs than others. A lot of those needs are actually things that make us great at business. Very common for people with ADHD, we have to make a dent in the world. Very common for ADHD, we need novelty and variety. Now, if we don't recognize and build the business around those needs and build it around our zone of genius, often what happens is people hop from idea to idea to idea as their way of getting variety. Or if we don't design the business around your zone of genius, somebody will be brilliant at the thing they do, but the day to day, just going back and forth on emails literally burns them out. Their cognition suffers, everything falls apart. So we have to think very strategically to how to build the business around you as the business owner, which is often very easy when we're at the highest levels of business. Very easy if you got 800 staff, you can build a business around you. Very easy if you work at McDonald's and somebody tells you exactly what to do. But a lot of people are in that spot where, you're a brilliant lawyer, you're a brilliant litigator, but maybe haven't built the law practice around you. And
Right.
the thing that's stopping you from that next level is actually how you've set up that structure around you. So it's those types of things. How do we actually acknowledge that maybe we do have different needs, and that's totally okay, but we have to like lean hard into it.
Nice. What's one counterintuitive habit or ritual you personally use to stay focused and productive as an ADHD founder?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that that's something I do that jumps out a little odd. People is a little odd. Is that I will deliberately introduce scarcity in the time of my day. So in other words, a challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs with ADHD have is that perhaps if time isn't feeling real, their life starts to blend in and
Mhm.
starts to become everything starts to blend in, harder to do things day to day. And the way that often people respond to that challenge of things not getting done is they'll work longer hours. They will
Mhm.
work harder. They will do it for day after day after day. They'll never take a break. I do the opposite, which is that I very explicitly set myself rules like I don't work on the same thing 2 days in a row to avoid
Mhm.
the blending of time. And what I find is that those types of strategies allow me to sort of like really feel something is real. It's true that I don't have, I think of it as a bureaucratic sense of time, the sort of like at 9 o'clock, I do the following because it's nine, it's at 10, go more on energy. But by structuring my day a little bit differently, where I'm very aware of how to manage that I have this different sense of time, the same sense of time that allows me to do in a week what other people, sorry, it allows me to do in a day what sometimes other people do in a week, where they're like, how did you do that? Is the same sense of time that sometimes will completely derail me if I don't set up those guardrails around me. So it's those little things. It's a little counterintuitive that to a lot of the sort of time management
Yeah.
advice, but I would offer that a lot of time management advice, it's a prescription to a problem that you don't have. It helps a tremendous amount of people if their problem is they've never thought about breaking down their to-do list A, B, C, D.
Right.
But if your problem is actually you have a different conception of time, if your problem is you have this brain that has like 80 ideas and they all feel equally important, those types of systems often lead to more overwhelm rather than clarity.
Yeah. I find that almost all my ideas or my to-dos, I should say, are all a priority. But
Sure.
then I don't end up getting them all done.
Right.
Funny enough. So that's very interesting. Very interesting. Um, how do you help ADHD entrepreneurs identify and recover lost revenue hidden in their day-to-day operations?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of it is working on us as the business owner. It is a truth that nothing is going to determine the success of your business other than you as the business owner, your own productivity. So often what that looks like is actually figuring out what are the specific ADHD barriers that are actually the blocker. So for example, if you run an Etsy store and it's a terrible Etsy store, I can't actually help you make any money. On the other hand, if you are a brilliant, you are a brilliant lawyer, you are a brilliant business owner, you have a small business, and the thing that's stopping you is maybe there's too much complexity in your billing systems and you're falling behind on things. If it's that you get overwhelmed or you feel a sense of avoidance when you're thinking about the finances, if it's something like you've never implemented some of these things around building time awareness or thought about different ways of prioritization, if clarity is a challenge that's really holding back your business growth, that's where I really can help in. Or help out. That's where I can really help out. So it's that sort of fundamental of understanding ourselves, breaking through the shame, figuring out what's holding you back personally, because people ADHD shows up in different ways for different people. Some people it shows up as rejection sensitivity. They don't ask for the sale or the prices they deserve because they feel a sense of rejection. And
Right.
if we can eliminate that, now they can earn. So it'll vary from person to person, but the idea is we do an audit of everything that's holding you back, and then we go at those things systematically so that this is the only time in your life that you have to work. You do this once, and then we're in a good spot.
Does this also affect self-image and self-worth, do you think?
Yeah,
Part of the
yeah,
reasoning on why they wouldn't ask for the sale or ask for what they're worth.
yeah. Quite frankly, I think one of the challenges with ADHD as a label
Hmm.
is it, and one of the differences when it comes to an adults is that so much of what actually is holding us back are limiting beliefs. Some of those beliefs could be around shame and how we see ourselves. Very common for people with ADHD to maybe have something in life that they have a lot of shame around. Maybe they say to their spouse that they're absolutely going to do a thing and they mean it with every bone in their body. And then it just skips their mind one day. And now they've broken that trust and it kills them inside. And so what do? Often they pick something else in life where they put it out saying, judge me on this. And that's not a bad, like that strategy works as maintaining our self-esteem, but it puts us at a huge risk for these people who have this sort of shame thing of if anyone ever criticizes that aspect, that thing we do, it can lead it so people get into some people get into perfectionism, things like that. So that's one of the reasons why it's very different from ADHD in children, and one of the reasons why it's very different of why high performers and low performers have it impact them differently. You can't take a pill that's going to do anything to do with your shame. A pill is not going to do anything about your level of time awareness. It's not going to do anything around your level of being able to prioritize your work. But those are
Right.
all things that have to be unlocked.
Interesting. Very interesting. Let me ask you, what ways can executive dysfunction actually create creative advantages or opportunities in business?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that a common exercise I take people through is to look at every sort of challenge they have and to consider what's sort of like the equivalent advantage if we were to harness it. So here's a very clear example. Many people with ADHD struggle with frustration tolerance. I am a person who does not like at all dealing with any sort of government bureaucracies with like instructions that don't make sense, things I have to do twice. I have a very low tolerance for it. But quite frankly, that same trait is the trait that allows me to like not tolerate things in business. I have like really high standards of like the level of impact that I want to make with people is high. Where it becomes a challenge is if we don't. So on one hand, that dysfunction gives me a lot of strength. But on the other hand, if I don't manage that piece, then I might also live in a place where I have a very bad time. My ability to endlessly brainstorm and create, you know, that sort of unstructured thinking, brilliant advantage. But unless we find some ways to mitigate it, it might also be the source of our lack of clarity. So it's very often true that a lot of the things, and that's why I don't find the sort of disorder, dysfunction, a very useful distinction. Because when I think about the things that actually make people successful as entrepreneurs, like a lot of these things, it's true. They're not found in the normal population, and that's totally okay.
Okay, so you mentioned building a business that hums even on low energy days. What are some systems that make that possible for ADHD entrepreneurs?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a very common starting place for somebody who hasn't yet really gained a little bit more control over their focus. It's very common that we have days that are just like the most amazing productivity day we've ever had, and then it's like the lowest day, and people might not always be able to predict what those look like because they're often like what's happening is they've been getting through life by just like pushing energy, which can also burn us out. So particularly early on in business, it's important to actually build that structure so that the whole system can't fall apart just because we have one of those days. It might look like things like setting up our schedules in particular ways so that we can take advantage of like if we get into one of those zones that we have designed our schedule in a way that we can stay in that zone and take advantage of it. And it might also look like setting up contingencies so that if your business requires you to be 95% on at all times, sometimes what's better is to think of a more simplified version of that business that doesn't require that. Yes, it would be nice. What if we were on 100% of the time? But if we're setting up something that might not, we might not succeed, like that could be the thing that brings us down. Over time, that becomes less important when we learn how to sort of burn more, when we learn how to regain control over our focus, as an example, it becomes less important to be able to sort of adjust for those wild swings
Hmm,
through. Um,
very good. So, what adjustments should ADHD, forgive me, that's a hard word to say. What adjustments should ADHD entrepreneurs make when it comes to hiring and building teams that match their unique leadership style?
Yeah. So often the very traits that make us very successful as entrepreneurs with ADHD drive people around us nuts if they might not be those particular types.
Right.
I'm very thankful for not to put down all of I know there's accountants out there with ADD as well. I'm very grateful that my accountant is by the book, line by line, gets things done. And sometimes that's a source of conflict between these two types.
Right.
Sometimes ways of referring to them if we don't like what sometimes it's referred to the sort of like maker types and manager types of the world. The creative types of the world drive a lot of other people nuts, vice versa. So part of what we have to do is recognize that those are actually the sources of our best partnerships.
Hmm.
And that can be tough because the tendency is we want to work with people who think exactly like us. It's fun to talk with them. It's fun to have those big ideas. And similarly, those sort of manager types tend to prefer to deal with those types. So part of it's just embracing that we're going to have some of these conflicts. Some of it's thinking about how to simplify a lot of the structures around us so that one, we're not overwhelmed by the level of complexity that somebody like that might bring to the organization. They want to keep increasing the complexity ceiling of how we work above our ability to handle it. And on our side, It might involve thinking about very strategically how to communicate with people differently. I mean, this is something I get into with people more in depth in the work that we do, but just as a very basic example, you know, people with ADHD might be the people who are comfortable from going from version 1.01 to 1.02 and 1.03, and they're comfortable doing that week to week to week to week. Other people can't proceed with that level of change. So it involves considering those things carefully and how we work with people, as opposed to just seeing it as um, purely a dysfunctional relationship. It's just one that needs to be managed quite differently.
Well, that leads to the question: how can someone with ADHD set up delegation workflows when they naturally struggle with follow through or micromanaging?
Sure. Yeah. So if we struggle with micromanaging, that probably means that we're not going to hire people at the lower end of the wage spectrum who have lower levels of generally speaking, we need to work with people with higher levels of judgment and discernment. We're a little bit more comfortable with a little bit of ambiguity. A common trap that entrepreneurs with ADHD find themselves in is they hire somebody which has lower levels of executive functioning than they do, or similar levels. And it's kind of like a system. If I only trust, I need to be able to 100% trust the follow through of somebody I'm working with. If I only 95% trust them, it's not like I think about what they're doing 95% of the time or 5% of the time. I think about what they're doing 100% of the time because I don't know what 5% dropped. Similarly, um, when we're in these types of relationships, we have to be very cautious of a pattern that can emerge where some people in life, people with ADD, ADHD, tend to be great problem solvers. They love solving problems. It's fun. Other people in life, those manager types, tend to be a little bit less risk, or a little more risk averse, tend to want to be told exactly what to do. You tell me exactly what to do and I'll do it. We can sometimes get into very dysfunctional relationships where somebody comes and says, "Hey, tell me exactly what to do." We solve the problem for them. And what do? They come back to have their problem solved, come back to have their problem solved, come back to have their problem solved. And now the business owner with ADHD is saying, "Oh my God, people are coming to me all the time and I'm interrupted all the time and I never have any time to get things done." And it's inadvertently a situation where we might have created from our own making by taking ownership for solving other people's problems because we find it fun and easy, but we don't actually like being in that spot where if we're having to solve everyone's problems, then we never get to actually get into the deep work needed in our organization.
Wow. You know, many ADHD entrepreneurs are idea rich, but execution poor. How do you help them narrow down and commit to their right priorities?
Sure. There's a few things. So one is
You had
recognize.
mentioned you had 80 URLs on
Sure.
GoDaddy, and
Right. How do you get past that point where we're having 80 great ideas?
right.
So one is recognizing that maybe we have a need for variety. So how could I meet that need for variety within one opportunity that doesn't change? How, and thinking about like some of the work you might be doing with marketing and hooks with people, how does that actually allow you to have one core offer, but you have endless variety of always interesting clients to work with, always interesting different hooks, different ways of doing that? Is that the place where we could channel that need for variety, as opposed to changing what we're doing day to day? You have to think through that strategically so that we're not missing that. That could be one of the ways. But the main way that we address this is we address the sort of fundamental myth of ADD, which is that it is a deficit of attention. And I don't know if you've worked with those types, what you might notice is actually they have the ability to get into levels of focus and attention that no one else around them does. The challenge is they can't always turn that on in command. Sometimes it happens, you get hyperfixated based on an interest, and
Wow.
it pulls us off to the side. So what the other piece of what we need to learn how to do is to learn how to be able to control that attention so that it's not controlling us. Because that level of attention, that level of focus we can get in is amazing, but it can also be the thing if if I get caught on some sort of an idea that's interesting to me in the moment and it pulls off my whole week, it could absolutely destroy everything you're doing. So two prongs of it. One is thinking, how do we actually meet our needs for variety in the design of our business? And the second is making sure that we have actually learned how to control the attention. It's not just it's not an on or off switch. Some people, maybe they take Ritalin and they discover that they have focus like never before, but they're doing all the wrong stuff. They're
Mm,
they're hyper focused on the wrong things because what they haven't learned yet is the control aspect, which is what it means to work on ourselves.
right. Interesting. So again, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about system structure and sustainability. So what's one system you've seen completely transform a business once the founder got it aligned with their ADD or ADHD brain?
Yeah, so a very common, very type of workflow that I've done with a lot of people who have some sort of coaching practice, or maybe they're a therapist, is that we focus on reducing, like just optimizing everything in the business for simplicity, ruthless simplicity, even
Yeah,
to the point it's uncomfortable because it feels like we're leaving money on the table. Well, what
right.
if with this other integration we could do this and this and this, and we can see that little opportunity. But often what happens is that what might be true with ADHD is we have a lower complexity ceiling. We have a lower working memory. It's kind of like juggling balls. Maybe you've gone through life that the maximum number of balls you can juggle at a time is six. Other people can go through life, they can juggle nine. Now, the challenge is if the systems in your business, you add a couple more systems, and it's the equivalent of juggling seven balls, one more than your capacity. Do you just drop the one? No, you drop all of them.
Mm,
Everything grinds to a halt. And what often people find that surprises them is that what's been going on, what they perceive to be their inability to sort of like get a hold of things, there's always so much on their plate. It's that they've been operating sort of like 1 degree past their complexity ceiling. And if we just shift that, so everything's a little bit smaller, we have line of sight on everything, people's levels of stress declines. But it's hard because it feels counterintuitive. In the moment, it always feels that there's this one more thing that would where we're leaving money on the table. But it's that sort of adage of, and by the way, this sort of adage of, simple scales, complex fails. It makes everything easier in our business. But it's sort of just deciding that we're going to have a ruthless focus on simplicity.
excellent. So how do you help your clients break free from the productivity guilt loop and still grow their business profitably?
Sure. So the most important thing for somebody to understand is that they have gone through their whole life not understanding what was going on. That might have been the path. That in that moment where we make a promise to somebody and we don't follow through, it may have felt like maybe perceived by others like we didn't care enough. We might have tried over and over and over again. We try over and over and over to try solutions that weren't made for people like us. We
Mm,
read all the books, eat that frog, we're going to like follow all of the advice. And the more that we try advice that's not made for the problem that we have, often that is actually the source of the shame. It'd be one thing if I tried once and gave up. Be another thing if I didn't even care. It's a whole other thing to say I've tried over and over and over and failed and failed and failed. And at some point you might think, okay, well, it has to be me at this point.
mm,
But maybe the thing that's actually been going on is that, maybe nobody has showed you. They haven't told you that like time awareness is a thing to work on. Maybe they haven't showed you how exactly a business that might operate amazing for somebody else isn't the thing that's going to work for you. What we might find is that it's not that you are broken. It's not that you are defective and in some way. I would offer if you take a serious look, if you want to look at if I look at some of the list of the world's richest people and I look at them and say, how many of these folks have, excluding anyone who owns an oil field, like how many of these people have some sort of like ADHD traits, autistic traits, and it's pretty high. So it must be true. It must be true if I see people around me like this at all levels of business. It can't be true that I'm actually dealing with something that is going to entirely hold me back. There must be something there. And one of the things that I do in our program is I very deliberately make it for business owners with business owners so that we see other responsible people, not victims. We're going through these issues and seeing that there is something to overcome. learned behaviors that we might pick up as a result of our ADHD can be unlearned. Pieces of our brain, like impulse control, like working memory, we can develop those parts of our brain. There's all, strategies that weren't made for us. We can find strategies that are made for us. There's something to overcome. And that is often the source that starts to break away the shame. When we start to use the right, it's sort of like if we've gone through my life trying to play baseball right-handed, and then I learn at age 40 I'm left-handed, and oh my God, that's why I've been so terrible at it. Suddenly all of that shame of what a broken baseball player I am goes away. And that's often what that experience looks like. So I'll just offer that there is there is a whole other level. It's probably not going to be found in, like anything in life. It's not going to be found for searching for little hacks and tinkering around the edges. It's going hard at what might actually be holding you back, which is just how you've gone through life up until this moment.
Wow. Sometimes I don't have anything to add on to it because you've just been so thorough, and I appreciate that very much. What do you say to the ADHD entrepreneur who believes structure kills creativity?
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to have a personalized approach. There absolutely are some people in the world with ADHD who lean hard into structure, and it serves them exceptionally well. I think about Seth Godin as an example of somebody who's publicly talked about having ADD, publicly talked about how, like, if you think about the disciplines that he puts in place, clearly has regimented his life in a particular way that works for him, and that's wonderful. And that might be part of your solution. I can tell you, I'm not that person. I actually don't do well with the very rigid, the rigid schedules. There are sort of different working styles, and we do have to find one that matches what works best for us. But what generally happens is that when we get at the root cause, if we get at the thing that's stopping, if we get at the avoidance, if we get at the overwhelm, if we get at the time paralysis, then often a lot of the problems that have led us to either looking for rigid solutions or trying to solve this problem purely through systems, they become less important, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of things just start to work because we've gone at the root issue. If you find that if you're doing the things that you actually write down every day, then time management actually becomes pretty simple. Time management's only really hard when we write things down and we don't do them, as an example.
Right. How do data and analytics play into your approach when ADHD brains often avoid numbers and tracking?
Sure. In terms of how might we work with data, and if somebody has a business that's really related on data, or more in terms of how do we think about the help we do in terms of data and analytics, what have we seen or what have we shown, or do
Yes.
people?
Any numbers that come up in a business, I mean, related to knowing your numbers, I mean, they say marketing is numbers and psychology. It's like, know your numbers. So how do you deal with the ADHD entrepreneur who has to deal with that?
Sure. So one piece, you talked about the psychology. One piece is examining, do we have that feeling inside that when we think about that, either we think about that pile of mail with taxes in it, or if we think about looking at our financial accounts, if looking at those numbers creates sort of a reaction inside of you, like a feeling. It's not for everyone. For some people, they have this feeling of like, I just can't. For those folks, we actually have to chip away at that nervous system response, which is a learned behavior that feels like, oh my God, I saw a tiger, but we didn't see a tiger. You just looked at your Facebook numbers from yesterday. That's a totally different thing, right? So we do have to work on that nervous system response, because that might be the thing that holds you back. But also, I would say the other way that we address some of those things, it's very simple. It's very similar to the optimizing for simplicity. Part of what we need to do is break down our business into maybe 3 or 4 key drivers, 3 or 4 key numbers. I don't have to look at everything. If I try to look at everything, I might get overwhelmed, but I'm going to focus on the few things that matter. That can be very helpful. And in the interim, I say I don't want to undersell that working on and developing these skills is difficult, like anything in life. I wanted to learn how to play the piano. If I wanted to learn how to speak German, I'm absolutely capable. It's very difficult. Can do those things. In the interim, there's also things we can put in place. So a lot of the clients I work with, we change the way their financial reporting works to give them visibility of how the business is doing day to day in a way that doesn't require adding up all of the income and the expenses at the end of the month and then seeing how well did we do. there are some things if we could design the business around you in a little bit of a different way. But fundamentally, we got to get at that. Got to get at that feeling of feeling like we see a tiger when we look at any sort of statistics around our business.
Gotcha. Gotcha. For someone who just realizing ADHD is impacting their business, what would you say is the first change you recommend they make tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way, which is I do not believe that there is a particular, I would love if there was a hack or if there was a quick fix. I would love if there was like, cool, I'll do this one thing and then everything will be easier. I think it undersells what we're actually dealing with. If I learned I was diabetic, what's the one thing I can do tomorrow? I think I actually have to approach this very systematically in a structured way. And so that would actually be the suggestion is just saying, okay, I now have an explanation. I didn't have an explanation before. I now have an explanation. And now I have a choice. What am I going to do with this information? Am I going to decide that, okay, it's on me, got some things to overcome. I'm going to overcome them in a systematic way. Or, that's a valid option. A valid option is also decide of, I'm just going to keep going through life as is. That's totally valid. I don't know if that necessarily serves people well, but it's valid. What I would encourage people actually to avoid, which is the most common trap, which is sort of I've learned that I have ADHD and I start to watch a bunch of, Instagram influencers who also learned they had ADHD 3 weeks ago and they're given every hack they know, and that's why I tried to create a different place, which was business owners with business owners, people who operate like myself. We have a 7-figure business. It's not theoretical. It's not something like, oh, I've made a little worksheet. So that would be my main recommendation of we have to go about it in a really systematic way if we want to be serious about it, just like anything else in life.
Gotcha. So we've come to the end of my questions, but one question that's going to be important for anybody listening who's gotten something out of this, which if they have ADHD or ADD or anything that inspired them to watch this program, what do you offer and how can they get it?
Yeah, sure. So what I offer is that sort of path. If you don't want to if you don't want to mess around and go from place to place, trying to learn part of the story, and trying to piece it together yourself, if you see how much this has cost you in terms of missed opportunities, and you've decided like you're that person who wants to sort of like say, cool, I want to work with people who understand these things, how to develop those skills of controlling our focus, how to develop those skills around time awareness. On our website at theadhdtools.com, I have a video that describes exactly what that process looks like to do in a systematic way. And then you can make the decision about, I would encourage people to address those issues. We certainly can help particularly in a business context. So that would be the next step if folks were interested in learning what that might actually mean for themselves and their business.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I have a BS meter and I can tell when somebody doesn't know what they're talking about, but you're one of those experts that I light up and I'm smiling and I'm just, you are, what you're talking about. And I appreciate that very much. It's good to have people who know what they're talking about. Especially dealing with such a sensitive subject of ADHD and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is my passion. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 9 years old. My father told me if I want to make money, go out and earn it on my own. Instead of getting the little 50-cent what's it called allowance, right? So I found myself doing anything and everything to make money, and I love that. And so. Thank you so much for being here. And again, just for the sake, in case they missed it, what's the website they need to go to?
Sure. It's theadhdtools.com, or they can look up Ezra DeWolfe on any platform, channel, etc. They'll find me there.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for watching. If you're here listening or watching this podcast, we appreciate you. This is the EMP Podcast, Enhanced Marketing Performance. We're so glad that you were here today, and listen next week for another great episode. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.